Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where sales leaders teach you what's working for them so that you can build it yourself. Welcome back to the Predictable Revenue Podcast. I'm your host, Collin Stewart. Today, I'm joined by Giulio Segantini, an outbound sales trainer and for founders and SDRs. Giulio, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to jump into cold calling. We were talking in the pre-interview about, spray and pray and how it doesn't work anymore. So talk to me about why doesn't it work? And then we'll get into what you recommend to do differently.
I mean, look, so little disclaimer, everything technically works to some extent. It's just how effective it is, right? I mean, you can give a SDR a list of 1,000 people. If it calls them all, it'll book meetings. But we are at the point in time that technology can now help us refine this list, sometimes to a ridiculously good level of detail. So instead of trying to call like 100, let's say, let's go to recruitment, right? Very simple example. You can call 100 companies that might be recruiting for salespeople, or you can try and find the 15 that currently are, and then target the specific person that's the most likely to either know who's in charge or being in charge. And don't you prefer to make those 15 targeted calls? And then what will this do is also you don't demotivate the cold caller, because there's some people still calling reception. There's some people like making loads of calls, and imagine you get through, someone picks up the phone and it's not even the right person, or it's just not relevant at all. That's why I much prefer a very targeted approach to the call.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, with all the tools that are out there right now, like we've got a client that they had a list of like 800,000 potential prospects, and they have a very specific...
What are they selling? Candy?
No, it's like a type of shipping. And so they were going like anybody who ships. And we basically found a method they have a very specific thing that they ship. And we just used a clay sheet that was like, okay, go scrape the website, go look at this, throw it into a GPT query and be like, hey, tell me if this company's a good fit or not. And like we went from 800,000 to, I don't know, 10,000. Like we were bowling zeros. I was worried about the engagement. I'm like, I think I can make this work. I mean, it's so much easier. It's the needle in a haystack. There aren't going to be perfect filtering, sorting mechanisms for every single, use case out there. Everybody's listing. Hopefully there are a couple, but it's not going to be for everybody. But to your point, if you are just downloading a list off of Apollo and you're calling the office line, you're probably at a disadvantage compared to every other SDR out there.
Yeah, exactly. And look, these days, it's not anymore the times that you can just tell people to call and they'll do it. They'll just go somewhere else. We are at that point that the fluidity of the workforce is even higher. And I'm glad you mentioned Clay. I think if you're not using Clay to build your lists, you are basically going to become a dinosaur in the space of a couple of years.
Yeah, this podcast sponsored by Clay. Not really. That'd be great.
They'll come to sponsor you after this.
Probably not. We've had them on the show a bunch of times. So we've shot our shot. I talk about them all the time because I can't help myself. They're like, we know it's going to happen for free. We're not going to give you any money. Damn it, guys. Give me a discount. They're like, nah.
Absolutely not. Fair enough. Tough negotiating.
Varun, I'm coming for a discount. So spray and pray doesn't work. What's the opposite of that? What's working for you? What do you see?
I mean, look, what I started to do, and literally just change tactics, was myself. I call sales directors, founders on a daily basis. And now I've narrowed it down, and you can get to the point that you can literally build a list on Clay, exclude the companies that, let's say, do B2C, so I know your target. So you keep narrowing down. I'll target founders that are tech founders, because they're more likely to be wanting to build a code. And so you can narrow it. And then I use, actually, it's a tool that not many people know about, called Full and Rich. Basically, imagine it's like the waterfall technique that Clay uses for emails, but it does it for mobile numbers. So what I can do now, export the CSV from Clay and import it that, and I get a hit rate of like, sometimes like as high as 60-70% of the mobile numbers. That's that list. Full and rich, like enrichment, so full and rich. They're a French startup. They go on my radar, and basically since I started using them, I can now build a much more targeted list with things like funding, or like, are they hiring, or does the website mention free trial? Does the website have about X traffic? Let's say you're selling SEO, you can be like, well, your traffic is terrible, you're going to be a great target, etc., etc. I think the combination of Clay, Navigator, Apollo, and something to find good data is just going to be what your SDRs are going to love you.
Fair enough. I could probably geek out and talk about tools forever. And anybody on my team will attest to like, yeah, don't ever let Collin open a Clay spreadsheet and screen share. Like it'll cost you now. It's not a good idea.
Fair enough.
I want to ask, how do you think about the psychological aspect of cold calling?
Well, look, I think cold calling in today's era is a controversial topic. You can see it on LinkedIn all the time. Everyone's raving, is it dead or not dead? It's like the zombie apocalypse when it comes to it. And the thing is like, it's taxing, right? Because rejection is harder than a slap in the face. This is scientifically proven. You remember your humiliations more than you remember your rejections. There will be times that I get rejected and I'll think about it 2 hours later, but like, why the hell am I thinking about a guy I'm never going to see again? So obviously the psychology of it is that you need to get through the first barrier. But more importantly, I think that the era of the frameworks is slowly dying. So we got all these gurus coming up with their own 3-letter framework of how you can generate loads of meetings that are actually not backed by human psychology. And this is or data or experience. I mean, sometimes there's some gurus coming up like, hey, try this. And then you download the script. It's like, hey, how are you? That's literally the start. I was like, oh my God, this is terrible. And this guy that
from a virgin.
I'm being worse.
Have you ever made a cold call?
Yeah, like I think it's like getting sex advice from someone that had sex and was terrible at it, because like a virgin doesn't know anything, but like some of these are like, oh yeah, I made 5 cold calls in my life. I sucked at it, but I'm just gonna tell you how it's done.
Yeah, because everybody was a gatekeeper, and I called all the wrong people, and
and all the excuses in the planet, basically.
Totally. So back to the psychology. What's your frame of mind? Or like, how are you coaching SDRs? How are you approaching a cold call when you're getting into this?
Well, look, I must say I've had ledger coaches, including this guy, Benjamin Denhay, and a couple of other guys from the We Have a Meeting, which I'm a loyal follower. And from them, I learned that you should be focusing entirely on human psychology. And the first thing that should happen is what is every person's favorite topic? Themselves. Absolutely right. And the thing is like when you're starting a cold call, we're like, hey, I am Giulio from ABC company. We do this. You're doing the complete opposite of that, right? Mm-hmm. And that is exactly what we're teaching salespeople to do. So my first focus is to try and get the person to understand you want to talk about you, but this is not about you. It's about that. So that's, I think that if people are going to take one thing away from this podcast is if you switch the focus from yourself to them, you already become like 5 times a better salesperson.
The classic hero's journey, right? Like we are not Luke Skywalker in Star Wars. We are Yoda, this strange little green man sitting on the side. Everybody else is kind of the main event.
Or Chewbacca, is it?
I would do my best Chewie if I could. It would turn into like puberty scream.
Let's keep that for now.
Love it. I like to think of a cold call as like pushing a giant rock up a very steep hill. And if you can push just long enough to get to find that problem, that steep hill just sort of like plateaus. It's not a big plateau. The rock is still resting there. And if you lose the momentum, it might roll back on you. But you want to get to that first plateau. And so in order to get there, you first need to get not hung up on and then build enough trust to get them to answer honestly. So like, how do you get them to this point where they are willing to answer you honestly?
Well, okay. So I would say like, this is again, another controversial topic, which is how do you start a call? And I must say it's probably what I do it myself, but we all get stuck. We think that there's going to be a opener that's like, it's like, to make a very weird comparison, it's like a Tinder chat up line. So people think I'm going to have it. And then after that, everyone is going to talk to me. And it just doesn't work like that. But especially for junior people, you want something reliable and consistent that will help you to get the conversation started. And if you do it in the right way, I think that's when you tend to get better results.
100%. So in your opinion, what is the right way to open up a conversation?
Well, I've got a couple of openers that I've been like fidelized to throughout the last, let's say, couple of years. So the first one that I like it, and this is particularly important if you're doing that screening beforehand. So if you really got a very targeted list, and it's something very simple, which is start with acknowledging that it's an interruption. So it'll be something like, you're not expecting my call. We've never spoken before. So I'll be like, hey, Collin, we've never spoken before. You're part of a list of B2B SaaS founders I would like to work with. Can you help me figure out if that's right? Right. And it's like simple, and it works because you're acknowledging the interruption so that the limbic brain, the chin brain relaxes for a second. Then you make them feel good because you tell them they're part of a list. And ideally, they are part of an actual list because you actually did a good targeted list. And then when you ask for help, you're triggering all the part of the brain that says like, oh, you know what? This is a nice way to start a sales call. So that would be like, that's my go-to. That's the one that works probably 85 to 90% of the time.
I like that. I also love that you're starting with, you're going to hate this, but you just picked up a cold call. How do you get more of an accusation audit than that? Be like, I'm sorry, but you just lost. It's the opposite of those pop-ups from the 90s that said, congratulations, you won.
Yeah. It's like, in this case, sometimes they're not going to get it right away. If you just start we've never spoken before, they might not understand it's a cold call right away, but more often than not, they will. But the important part is that you're not doing what everyone else is doing. So honestly, even if you started I saw someone on LinkedIn say that one of their best performing colleagues would start every call with hey, what's up, Collin? And it just worked because it was so weird compared to everything else, right? And they were like, do I know this person? So it hacks that brain. So the first thing is got to be, you got to scramble their brain a little bit. But obviously, the more professional and targeted sounds, the better test.
So once you've interrupted their brain with a pattern interrupt, what's your go-to for getting to that magical question?
Well,
bridge the gap.
So usually this is probably, again, something that I've been told by Jack and Zach, which for me was the bridge that some people miss, is that at this point, more often than not, they'll be like, well, it depends what's regarding. And this is not yet the time where you can go into the pitch or into your problem statement, let's say. Just because they haven't actually given you permission. They say, well, it depends what's regarding. And this is, for me, it's quite easy because I've got perfect line, which is fair enough, I did call you out of the blue. I'll tell you what, I'll briefly explain it. If it's not relevant, you'll never hear my Italian accent again. Is that fair? And then at this point, I'm also breaking a bit of humor in there. And it's, at this point, I got that. It's very rare. And this, if you're in the US, for example, there's a very good chance you'll be calling outside of your state. And you could be like, there will be a chance. You could be like, yeah, you're never going to hear my New York accent again. Or something like that, or my Southern accent, or something like that. So you can put it in there to just kind of make the call more human. Yeah, a little bit of self-deprecating, a little bit of obviously if you're bored by the end or things like this, just to start setting the tone. I've opened, I'm a human being. That's the second part that they should be feeling.
Gotcha. So you say, hey, give me a minute and you'll never hear if it's relevant, great. If not, you'll never hear my Italian voice again. And then you jump into what?
And I still wait for I'll just ask, is this fair? Right? Because at this point, what will happen is that they've agreed twice to the call. So, and this is probably important because a lot of people think if the person is talking, they're not hanging up, they're listening. That's not true. If the person's brain is scrambling to figure out what's going on, they're not listening. So you might get through the pitch, but if they're not listening to you, what's the point? And it's about quality over quantity. And then look, when it comes to pitch, I call it a pitch, but it's not really a pitch. It's more like a problem statement. So the stereotypical SDR, or founders actually even worse, because founders love talking about their products. They'll go into we've got the best UX, our CRM is blah, 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 whatever, which is a lot of smoke and no beat. And this is instead what you want to focus on is what are the 1 to 3 problems that your company or yourself fix that could be relevant. So for example, for me, let's say calling you up and you're a founder. Typically, I'm working with founders that got a couple of problems with sales. The first one might be that they are setting up an outbound function, but they're not sure how to do it. And they're worried they might be taking for a run for their money. Right. So something very specific, something visceral, they might be thinking themselves, using that word is the best. The words is the best. And then there'll be alternatively, they already have an outbound function. It's just not performing as well as it could be. And it's very expensive to maintain, which is putting them in a weird spot. So that's I usually go with two problems. Some situations you might go with a very big, hairy problem, right? And then the final part would be like, look, you could tell me like perhaps neither of these two resonate, and I'm barking up the wrong phone. I actually use the barking up the wrong phone because I'm underdog sales, so just make it fun. And they'll be like, and they usually laugh again. So again, I'm trying to get in more humorous as well at the main time. So and the idea is that they'll either contradict you or they start to be like, well, no, actually, that's the opposite of my problem. And that's when you can kind of start to move like, should I disqualify, right? And that's basically like how the first minute of the call usually go.
Okay. And so you pick the problem, and it sounds like from your pre-research, you're calling a list, you may have a problem identified for a specific list. Like if you've identified they have SDR team or not.
Exactly.
Okay. So you pick the problem statement and then get them to, and so, yeah, once you pick your problem statement, they say yes or no. Where are you taking this call? So if you say, yes, that's me, where do you go?
Yes, that's me, frankly, doesn't happen very often. But for the simple fact that even if they do have that problem, they might not be willing to admit it right away. Usually the best response you get, I mean, it happens sometimes I say that, and I booked a meeting last week in 3 minutes, right, literally, which I also wasn't happy about because I didn't qualify the problem well enough, right? But the guy was in a hurry, I was like, but then usually what you'll get is something like, well, every company's got, and this is where you can kind of go with be like, well, look, if that were true, I'd be a millionaire and I wouldn't be calling you, you'd be calling me. And again, always humorous, always try to keep it quite light. And then you try to get them back to the problems like, but look, for the sake of the arguments, like which one of the two would be the priority? And so again, like you're taking them back to that problem so that they can go deeper into the thinking. And this is what we think about problems all day. So like if you take them down that path, there's a major chance you start actually building real rapport. So that could be some of the ideas.
Gotcha. And so we've led them down this path. They've said, you know what? No, you got to give them the two options. You know, they say, no, neither of those, or no, I don't have that problem, but they really do have that problem. You handle it with a little bit of humor. I like that you're prepared for the inevitable objections. I think that's a mistake that a lot of SDRs make is they practice the script or their lines, and there's no room, there's no pause in there for objections. It's so on rails. This thing is like a train when it needs to be a car.
Yes. I've had this as well with some companies I worked with, but they were like, they gotta follow the script. I'm a big fan of scripts. As long as you understand that the script is the skeleton doesn't move the body, the muscle. So the skeleton needs to be there to support you, but at the end of the day, it's the muscle and the muscle memory of your brain that will help you through this. So like, for example, I even use some tools to like prepare for objections where like you hear the recording and then they'll hit you with the objection and you can respond. So like just to get the SDR to the mind frame is like, this will happen. The more prepared I am for it, the more likely it is to succeed.
Totally. And so once you've got them they've identified a pain, how do you get them to tell you more? Because, it's one thing to get them to say, yes, I have that pain. It's another thing to get them to truly trust you enough to open up on a call. How do you do that?
Of course. Well, look, this is actually the biggest thing I've learned when I was briefly an intern for a SDR agency when I switched to become a sales trainer. And from these guys I keep referring to Zach and Jack with a meeting. And this is genius. So it relies heavily on what we call availability heuristics. So you simply ask them for an example, which is like, look, when you say you have a meeting, when you say you have an outbound problem and it's not working as well as you do, what does that look like in your world? Because it's different from every company. Can you give me an example? And once they have the example, that means that in their mind, it's like if I ask you, can you remember a time where someone offended you? Or could you remember a time when someone, where you are generous? You automatically perceive yourself as more generous. This is actually in Cialdini's persuasion. He talks quite a lot about this. It's exactly the logic that once they have the example, usually you have the meeting. Because if they can think of an example, it means the problem is real. And the opposite. I've had one recently where said, I'm always interested in sales. I was like, okay, which one of the two? He told me, I would like, better functionality for the outbound. Okay, can you give me an example? And I was like, well, actually, we just set up the team. So perhaps it's a bit early. And he didn't have an example. And at that point, I know that the person is just not ready to actually explore a solution.
Yeah, there's nothing there. It's such a great question. Can you give me an example? I don't think that's a question I remember asking or teaching somebody to use on a sales call. So I'm absolutely going to steal that.
I wish I came up with it, but it's this guy and we have a meeting guys that are religious about this, and it works.
Love it. So you get them to give you an example. Say they give you an example that's relevant and you can solve it. Where you go next?
Well, at this point, actually, most people would be like, "Oh, you said a meeting, right?" But no, so at this point, it's like you got to test: is this something that they care about fixing? I'll give you an example. Like the pitch I used to do before was more like, you might be having a problem with the salespeople that are reluctant to pick up the phone, and then when you start testing it, you find that a lot of the founders are just giving up fixing this problem, and you can't get someone to fix a problem if they just accept this the way to be. So at this point, it's like, once the example is like figuring out where does it come from? So like thinking a bit details, like what's the impact? Although I never use the word impact again, a very big question I've been taught is, what does that actually mean for you? And then they usually will go a little bit deeper, but well, it means that I'm struggling to hit my revenue targets and my investors are not particularly happy. And then essentially, like, once you have a list of the overall problem and fleshed out, you summarize it, make sure that they say, that's right, like the Chris Voss, like
you're
that.
right.
Yeah, exactly. And at that point, it's just, do you mind if I ask one last tough question? Yeah, have you given up trying to fix it? And again, like, I wish I came up with this, but I'm just preaching it. But yeah, and at that point, well, that's more like to out to your rescue. Yeah, but it is like, it's in a way, it's like you're trying to get the no, right? It's easier to get the no in that case. Because if you say like, okay, so this is a problem, like, do you want to do something about it? Boom, try to sell to me, right? Mm-hmm. So the beautiful thing about this, and like, I've got, there's a call I always showcase with some of my clients where I basically book the meeting in 6 minutes and we go through the whole process, and the guy doesn't know my name and he doesn't actually know what I do, but we just talked about the problem so deeply that it's just like, he's just so wrapped into it. And I did go like, oh, what's your name? I said, it's Giulio. Don't worry, I'm about to send you a LinkedIn connection request before our meeting, etc. So yeah, like, I think that's the level when you know at that point that they not only they will sit the meeting, but they are very likely to buy. Which I'm talking a little bit too much, but I just want to wrap this up in the sense that I think our sales culture, especially in SaaS companies, it's really built on like setting the meetings. And very few SDRs have got revenue. Well, at the end of the day, what you want is that you don't want SDRs booking 12 crap meetings. You want SDRs booking your like good meetings with a high close rate, which is why account executives, when they prospect, they disqualify really hard because they don't want to go through the whole process of like getting a check and all these things if there's not really a problem. And so I think this is something quite important to figure out. Is like, don't focus so much on getting the meeting, or focus on getting the deal. That would be the thing.
Totally. I think first 3 months as being an SDR, just focus on getting that volume. Once you've proved, yes, hey, I can book volume, then transition to quality. Because if you're listening to this and you're a new SDR, you're like, cool, I'm only going to cherry pick advice, or I'm just going to cherry pick these deals, and that could be a dangerous.
Absolutely. And I would say this is actually not for the SDRs; it's more for the leaders and the founders. Which, when they're setting up targets for the teams, like, you got to think about what is it that I want to motivate them on. Because, and this is why I'm sometimes a bit skeptical of the commission-only SDRs for meetings, because they'll do anything to get you to send them, because they don't care about anything else.
Which I think is an indictment of the model in and of itself, is that the SDRs are more likely to just book anything because they're getting paid, because they don't get paid if their company doesn't get paid for this. Mm-hmm. And then if I've been on the other end of this, if you're the client, or if you have the client doesn't want to pay for anything that isn't absolutely perfect. So it's misaligned incentives, even if you think you're doing value-based pricing like HubSpot says you're supposed to. Giulio, I really appreciate you sharing all of this with us. And if people are wondering, hey, this guy sounds like he's pretty good at his job, maybe I could get in touch with him about, getting some training from my SDRs. What do you do? What's the best place for people to reach you?
Well, look, I mean, obviously LinkedIn is the easiest place to reach me. And if you're thinking this guy sounds pretty good, you're probably just delusional, but that's okay. You know, we can talk through that in the therapy session. But yeah, LinkedIn is the easiest way to reach me. And even if you're not looking for like training, I'm a sucker for likes and follows. So feel free to follow me on LinkedIn and we can take it from there.
Fair enough, man. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I'll make sure we throw a link to your LinkedIn in the show notes. So if anybody's looking to get in touch, tell them you heard about it through the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
No, thank you for having me, Collin. Pleasure.
Thanks for being on here. Thanks, everybody. See y'all next week.